Okay, so can everybody see that? At least, okay, I just want to make sure everybody's on board. Okay, so Chapter 5 covers the first officer on scene, and this is going to be kind of a two-parter. The first part, we're going to talk about what the textbook wants you to learn as it relates to responding as a first officer, what some of your duties might be, how to take notes when you first get there, and some other safety factors when you're the first person on scene. Because it's going to play out to a larger extent when you start talking about the investigative side, and that'll be the second half of our lecture. So and if we get through this one fairly quick, we don't have to break, and if we feel like we're going a little bit long, we can always break, or you can just go take a break and come back, however you want to do it. So we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there. But so we're going to talk about what it's like to be the first officer on scene and what you're going to have to do. And if I'm not mistaken, this photo is your discussion post, I think, if I'm thinking correctly. So sometimes what you see when you get to these scenes, you have to be able to, of course, kind of keep your composure, because people are going to be expecting you to keep your composure. But there's going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of different things going on. And when you look at this picture, one thing, without giving too much of it away for your other assignment, you see a couple of things here that really don't fit into a crime scene. So, for instance, you have rubber gloves, you have some, a piece of paper here, and a gauze package right here, because that's from the paramedics. And typically what happens is you don't have just yourself to worry about when you're the first person on scene. You've got other emergency personnel that you have to kind of help get into your crime scene and get out of your crime scene without making a total disaster out of it. A lot of I'm not bagging on the fire department, but their job is a little bit different, and they don't really care too much about the evidence versus getting in there and saving whoever it is that they need to save. So sometimes you have to kind of guide them in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So part of our goal for this chapter is to recognize how you're going to prioritize things as the first officer on scene. Because again, there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. And then we're going to want to be able to understand that there's three major things that you have to do at a crime scene before you can even get into the note-taking and photographing and investigative part. There's a couple of things that you have to do, because crime scenes typically are kind of evolving a lot of times. Sometimes they're not, but typically they might be. And you have to understand, your role as a first responder. And I have to, sorry about the gory pictures, but these are things that you might see when you end up at a crime scene. And there's a lot to it. So you have to understand some of the techniques when you interview, when you're dealing with a heavy duty crime scene like the one you see right here. So just kind of a lot to talk about. So a crime scene typically is anything but a controlled environment, because there's kind of an expectation that when law enforcement gets there, that they're going to take control and bring that crime scene. They're going to kind of establish some semblance of order, and maybe de-escalate things. A lot of times when you get to a crime scene, if you've ever been on a ride along, maybe you've seen this, where victims' relatives, people are screaming, yelling, crying. There's all kinds of different things going on, and you have a lot of things going on around you. So these crime scenes can be a little bit hectic. A lot of times, like I said, victims, witnesses, and even the suspects, if they're still there, they really add to the confusion of what's going on. So, we have to understand that these scenes are active, flowing, with a lot of moving parts. Some are a little bit easier. Maybe they're secluded into a residence, into a single bedroom or something, and there's not all the hoopla going on. But things that happen outside, a lot of times you're going to get spectators and the media and family members, etc. So just a lot of things can happen out there. So, when you arrive at the crime scene, your job is to kind of determine what should be done first at that crime scene, in order to make it safe for citizens and law enforcement. And you have to kind of think about that. And once that's established, once these three things that we're going to talk about are established, then you can start taking notes and starting to gather up the information that you're going to need in order to write your report. Anybody have any idea on what you believe the first thing you need to do when you get to a crime scene?
Make sure the place.
Okay, so I heard secure, and I think I heard somebody say make it safe.
Secure the place and make sure that it's safe.
Okay.
Basically the same.
All right. Anything else? Anything different? Going once, going twice. Okay. So, and we're going to get to that in a second. I wanted to make sure I asked that question. So again, we talked about note taking in previous chapters. Just remember that this is really an essential part of preparing your actual crime report, because the notes you take are going to help you remember exactly what you did. So, taking those good notes and then being able to take that information and, that accurate information, hopefully, and put it in your case report, your crime report, is how you're going to be successful at these different scenes. At some point, there's going to be some time for you to sit down and write your report. And again, you're going to need to be able to refer back to your notes. So legibly accurate, addresses, names, everything correct. As it relates to the crime scene, your initial actions are really critical to the resolution of the incident, because you're going to be the best source of information regarding that incident if you're the first person there. And a lot of times you are. You may just have a victim of a crime and no one else is there. Somebody heard a gunshot, they called in, you responded, and you found somebody down in the street or something. So you're not going to have a lot of information initially. So you're going to be the one responsible for documenting your observation, the facts of the case, and completing that thorough report. And remember, all crime scenes, for the most part, regardless, there's going to be some collecting and preserving of evidence. So, remember that as well. And then it doesn't really end there, because part of your notes are going to help you when you have to testify in court. If you end up catching someone and you file a case, etc., your testimony is going to be a critical part of the prosecution. So good notes that make a good report are going to make for good testimony. So they kind of all feed into each other, because, part of your foundation when you go to court is you will be allowed to refer to your police report for certain things. But if your report's really not accurate, and you don't want to guess, you want to be able to refer to your report to get an accurate summary or statement or action that you took out at a crime scene. So here are the three tasks, kind of the big ones. There's a lot more when it comes to the investigative side. I mean, a lot more. But for the first officer on scene, here are three of the prioritized tasks. The first one is that you have to make sure the scene is safe. That's the very first thing. Because if the scene's not safe and there's still active danger, etc., you can't really do the other two, because you could end up getting yourself hurt or somebody else hurt or something like that. So you do need to make sure that the scene is safe, there's no suspects in the area, etc. Once that's done, then you can turn your attention to any type of emergency medical assistance that you're able to provide to somebody, so you can render first aid. And typically, again, this isn't a bag on the fire department, more than likely law enforcement will be to a crime scene first. And if you know anything about, police work, we don't respond from the station. Officers are out on calls and they go from one call to a different call, and then they patrol the area. So typically they're going to be faster because they're already out, versus the fire department might be dispatched from the station or a different station if another station is busy. So you are going to be the first one there. So you might have to render some type of medical assistance to somebody. And then once that's done, then you can go ahead and secure your crime scene. And then when you're done with those three things, then you can safely go ahead and jump into the note-taking part. So number one, ensure the scene is safe. Again, if there's a threat or some type of dangerous situation, that has to be dealt with first. I don't know if neutralized was the best word, but you have to deal with that dangerous threat, etc., before you can kind of move on. So your first priority, again, is always to make the scene safe for everybody there. Number two, again, render first aid if it's required. And sometimes, understandably, this might entail you compromising the evidentiary value of your crime scene. And what I mean by that is it's okay if you need to walk through a bloody footprint in order to give somebody CPR. You're not going to go, okay, wait a minute, I have to find a better path to run around and get to this person while they're not breathing. So, and I'm pretty sure that makes sense to everybody. So even though you're going to compromise part of your evidence, that's okay if you're going to render emergency, medical treatment to somebody. Keep it in the back of your mind, because you are going to have to maybe put it in your report why or what you did. I ran through the bloody footprints because I didn't have a choice. I had to, do something for somebody that was down, etc. So preservation of life has the highest priority. But that's once the crime scene is safe. And then again, once those two things are done, now you can start securing your scene. And maybe you've seen this before, and I'm sure you've seen it on TV, where you actually break out the yellow tape and you secure your scene using sometimes police cars, sometimes yellow tape, or other things that you might have available to you. So this is all an important part that's going to lead up to where you're actually going to be able to start your note taking. So when you secure the scene, you're going to mark off kind of what we call a perimeter. So it's a area around your crime scene. Or if it's a single room, then you could just secure the door. That would be okay. Typically, again, it's crime scene tape is what a lot of law enforcement officers use. Keep in mind that when you secure your scene, you're always going to make it larger at first, because if it's larger, you can always bring it in and make it smaller as you start to figure out that it's a little bit too big. But if you make it small, you can't really move it bigger or larger because your evidence is already kind of contaminated. Does that make sense? So you always want to start larger and move it in if you need to, versus smaller and trying to make it larger. You're also going to want to tell people to remove themselves from the crime scene. And that includes administrative staff at your police department, even the chief of police. I remember plenty of crime scenes I showed up at, and I thought it was cool, and I wanted to walk in there, and the detectives told me no, because I don't really have a reason to be in there. So, if people are in the crime scene, whether it's a victim that's conscious, etc., suspects, witnesses, bystanders, or even the media, you're going to want to move them outside of that crime scene. And then if you have witnesses or potential witnesses, you're going to want to separate them, because that's going to be important for your interview process, because you don't want them talking to each other and, making up stories, or you want them to give a unbiased statement, etc. And then also be aware of evidence contamination and preservation. So when you're processing your scene, just, kind of know that you don't want to contaminate things. Basically, what you don't want to do is bring extra stuff into the crime scene, unless it's something simple like the number placards that you see in this picture. These were not here, of course, as part of the crime scene, but they're detailing pieces of evidence, and you can easily explain that. But you don't want to be bringing in all kinds of other stuff like, oh, let me see what detectives are famous for. Drinking coffee in the crime scene. chewing sunflower seeds and spitting the shells on the ground, and things like that, or gum or different things. So you don't want to contaminate that scene. So you don't want to bring anything in that you don't have to bring in. You may need additional resources, and that again could be fire personnel, forensic technicians, the crime lab, the coroner, even other police officers or the detectives. But just note that you don't want your scene to get kind of trampled with all of these individuals in there. One of the ways to deal with that is to make a path that's the least intrusive path to your victim. That way you can have medical personnel, you can walk them into the scene, they can follow behind you, and you can walk them through the scene through a certain path. That way they're not wandering around and stepping on stuff or things like that. So we used to do that a lot of times with the paramedics. When they get to the scene of, let's say, a drive-by shooting or something, we would walk them into the scene, let them administer their medical assistance, and then we would walk them out. And that would just kind of keep the scene a little bit cleaner. So these are just ideas for you to think of. As a first responder, again, you're going to be in charge of that scene until you're relieved. And then once you're relieved, you can start, your report, which is going to be coming up here pretty quick. Every crime scene is unique. If you're the first responder to a small scene, you might actually do the whole thing by yourself. You may talk to witnesses, you may have to write the report, you may have to book the evidence, and you may have to arrest somebody if it's really small, if it's a really small crime scene. But if it's a larger scene, you're going to be probably given extra personnel to help you. So you'll have to kind of designate different tasks, and everybody will do supplemental reports. And we've already kind of covered that. Maybe a team of detectives will do a neighborhood canvass, which means they're going to go door to door and talk to people. If they find a witness, they're going to write that supplemental report that's going to get attached to your report. So you'll do the original, and everybody will put a supplemental into your report. So you're going to get help. Talking about what an investigation is real quick, it's the lawful search for things or people. It does come from the Latin. If you're interested in that, the term is vestigare, and it means track or trace. And you're going to be the investigator. And typically it's discovering, collecting, preparing, identifying, and presenting evidence. All of that's going to be in your report. So again, there's a lot more to it than just kind of, hey, I found this bullet casing, etc. Anything and everything should be considered to have evidentiary value unless you can rule it out. Your goal really at the crime scene is to find the truth. And typically you only have one good shot. Once you start processing things and photographing and picking them up, etc., you're not going to have the opportunity really to go back and see the scene in the exact same way. So you want to do this correctly. So while you're processing your scene, just start thinking about, how's this going to look in court? What's it going to look like if I have to testify? How am I going to write my report on how this was found, or if I had to move something, or if I accidentally kicked something, like I kicked a shell casing and it rolled out in the middle of the street, because you're going to have to say what you did. So all of these little things. And then while it's not a report, this is important because part of your crime scene is going to be maintaining a chain of custody for evidence. And so that means you're going to have to ensure that all potential evidence is, identified and preserved properly. And that's where that evidence report comes in. You're going to have to note all of the evidence you found. Chances are, if you don't have a forensic tech, you're going to have to package it yourself. You're going to have to mark it yourself. You're going to have to fill out the property tag yourself. Again, not big reports, and we'll cover some of the small reports in a couple chapters from now. But all of this is important information for you to know, because you're going to write this. And I know it seems like a lot. But understand, time is on your side, really, once you have the scene secure. Then you can start kind of being methodical and going through the entire thing. Let's see what else is really important. A couple of interesting things, just some kind of helpful hints. Don't attempt to recreate the crime scene if you move something. Again, you're just going to have to write in your report that you moved it and your rationale for why you moved it. Your evidence collection should not be done until photographs have been taken or sketches have been done. And a lot of agencies today, though, they use video cameras or recorders when they process the crime scene, which is good. So because you can walk through that scene and you can narrate as you're walking through. Sketches are still important, but that video really does help. Be cognizant of what might be considered evidence. Be open-minded. Be objective. Again, it's really important for you to, kind of be objective and just think about, don't rule something out. If you think it could be evidence at all, I would suggest that you document it and you pick it up, or you book it or have your forensic person book it, etc. A lot of departments have, we've talked before on, department policy. So, and here's just kind of a snapshot. Most departments have policies on how to work a crime scene, and scene security or scene integrity. So again, you're going to want to follow your department's guidelines, but a lot of them have kind of the same thing. But I just wanted you to see there is a policy that talks about how to take reports and how to deal with a crime or a disaster scene and the integrity of the scene. Remember, taking statements is usually the responsibility of the first officer on the scene, not always. So you're going to be, interviewing people and getting statements. So again, getting proper statements, taking notes, making sure that you're getting everything accurate is going to be really, really important. Always be cognizant of officer safety, because once you pulled out your notepad and you start doing what you're doing, you're not really going to be paying attention to the safety factor as much. So that's why you want to get that scene safe before you start, doing things. Let's see what else. Also with interviewing, always try to get a photo ID from people. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, people don't tell you their correct name. Or they just, they give you maybe, I'm not going to say an alias, but maybe they go by a nickname. So they might just use that, or they give you their maiden name or something, and you don't really have the correct information. So if it's not a bad tactic to ask for identification, and then you can write down, let's say, their driver's license number and their information there. But you're going to want phone numbers, address, place of employment, all of that. And the reason is so you can get in touch with them later on if you need to, or the DA can get in touch with them later on. It's kind of staying with the interviewing part. Always introduce yourself. Ask open-ended questions first. Give them a chance to talk a little bit. And if you need them to repeat something, have them do that. Don't just guess or try to remember later on, well, I think he said this. If you need somebody to repeat something, just tell them, I didn't quite get all of that. Could you repeat that for me? And then they'll go ahead and repeat it. So that's okay. Again, look at people's body language when you're talking to them, and the consistency of their stories and things like that. And again, you can do follow-up questions if you need to. Let's see, what else is important here? So we're kind of coming to the end. Again, this was a fairly quick little lecture. Make sure your scene is safe, render first aid, secure the scene. Of course, if the offender is there, you can detain them or arrest them if you have probable cause to do that. Always separate and identify your potential witnesses, and then identify those that are coming to help you, so you can properly take them into the scene and move them out, etc. And then make sure that you take notes. That's always a real important thing to do. So any questions on that? That one was fairly